Yo, 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 what's up? Hello, Xavier. Hello, Veek. Men with plans. Hey, speaking of which, since we're just starting out here, and Veek sent me some stuff, let's take a look. Okay. Alright, so Veek asked me to give him some feedback for his story for his campaign. Don't know if there's anything that's not in this particular text file that needs to be added for context. So let me take a look. I should preface it by saying generally speaking, when it comes to stories in RTS, like we had a whole pretty productive and interesting, I think, conversation in the Discord server earlier about RTS missions and storytelling and all that stuff, and how you can fit that into like how you can actually tell a story basically in an RTS, and where your limitations are. And I thought that that was, you know, a worthwhile conversation, generally speaking. But I guess that means I'm in the mode, right? So since I already talked a lot about that stuff, I'm going to try to remember when I say something that might be obvious, like might have already been established in that conversation. I don't know if Veek read it. I don't know if anybody else here has read it. So I'm going to try to like restate some stuff. So hopefully that makes sense. And yeah, I guess the premise here is that RTS constrains the stories that you are able to tell pretty heavily. So when dealing with that, it's one of those things that you kind of have to know what stories can work. And also, can work is different than will work, of course, because there's execution. Yeah, I could make you a mess maps. I usually make a campaign and melee maps, though. All right. So here it is, The Devoured Mind. The campaign tells a story about a young commander who is under the wing of his mentor. Missions take place in a distant sector named Nebula, around 200 years after the original campaign. Okay. So this sets up the idea that we would have significant changes to the tech tree, which I'm not 100% sure. But it also isn't, like, really, that's only because 200 years after the original campaign. That little one-liner there. I don't know how aggressively you plan on modifying the tech tree. I don't know if that's in this plan here, in this opening bit here. But that's one of those things where I think you got to be careful about the time thing. I know 200 years isn't really that much in cosmological scale, and even in, like, in theory, in sci-fi, like, you could, maybe that adds, like, a couple new units or something. But just remember that, and, you know, yeah, you're planning on using Hydra NGS, right? 200 years is a lot. If it is a super, I mean, it's its own sector, right? Sector is kind of a vague term, but if this is in the same galaxy as the Milky Way, but like an entire different quadrant of it or something, right? I could definitely see a world where that works out. So anyway, this is just a point where when you write this in as establishing material, there's an expectation, especially when it's a lot of years away, right? Like you're basically setting up the question, or begging the question, if you will, of what happened to the, like, what happened in the 200 years as far as tech is concerned. Now with the data extenders and with the less aggressively limited designs of our tech tree, of our engine, it's possible for you to add your own units that might fit into the whole ordeal. And I would say that that's even something I would recommend, is finding a way to add those, like add just a couple of new units here and there that are like faction specific or whatever, as long as they can occupy reasonable game space. But that's something for later on. It's just something to consider when you have the around 200 years thing at the beginning. Confederates colonized this world during the mentioned campaign. Terran forces in the sector that originated from Oh, I got super confused. All right, so Terran forces in the sector that originated from Confederate and other minor factions have united into one banner. Okay, so we're kind of shimmying this along. Right, yeah, of course. The iterative approach is really useful for that. So the idea of it being sourced from the Confederacy, but then, like, I guess they lost contact or cut off contact or whatever. They're renegade factions even to this day. Okay, so this sets up the idea that there would be there would be essentially like you're setting it up so that conflict between Terrans is possible, which is good because that gives you variety in your enemies as well as, of course, your allies. When it comes to map design, I am a little worried about the Confederate connection, just because it reads to me like an anchor to the original story that doesn't necessarily need to be there. But if it's just world building, maybe it's fine. It's just sort of like oh yeah, Confederates were here and then they stopped being here. That is believable. I mean, I imagine colonies would probably get abandoned quite a bit, especially considering what ends up happening in the original campaign. And then, 200 years later, maybe they're not even recognizable as Confederates anymore. And maybe there would be some rebel groups that would still want to keep the Confederacy thing alive or whatever, but they would just be like, they would almost be perceived by the populace as perhaps like a fragment or a relic in that sense. Right. So, let's see here. Overmind, even before the original campaign, has populated many sectors to establish control over them and to increase the size of its already massive race. After his death, Celebrates, by the way, Cerebrates in most distant sectors had to either evolve or die. An example of this is our antagonist, Cerebrate, who evolved to control 3 different brutes at once. Okay. He believes in the strength of the Zerg race, he desires excellence, and so he wants to expand his control even more. As the Overmind had Cerebrates, he wanted something similar. His newest experiments allowed him to infest Terran commanders, who would extend his will to new swarms without question. So this kind of the whole infestation thing plays into the idea that the Zerg can take some control over the over other organisms, which is in their lore, it's what they did for all of their situations. Like, all of their units come from them assimilating. Like, the Overlord was like a giant gas creature or something. Sort of like what's postulated that could exist in Jupiter's atmosphere, for example. They're like floaters or whatever. So like stuff like that. I mean, like, if you really dig into the lore, you can find examples of that. So that's sort of implied to be the thematic behind the race, and then they also have that weird like evolution thing. So I guess this builds on that. I'm not sure about the 3 different broods at once, because remember that a brood is actually like the scale of StarCraft's campaigns, and every custom campaign that took cues from StarCraft's campaign is really off. A brood is supposed to be like millions or billions of Zerg. So, I mean, if you're going by the manual anyway. If you're going by the in-game stuff, then I guess a brood is supposed to be like one base. So, hard to, yeah. Hard to really find a through line there. So, I would just say you could mention its size, the size of the Cerebrate, or maybe say that it absorbed broods of its other Cerebrates that happen to be in the area, and maybe it's made it like you establish that that's part of the Cerebrates' modus operandi. It's part of their way of getting around. Is like they have that sheer number thing, but it's because they are smashing through like they're absorbing whatever they come into contact with. And you could make an extension of that, be like, okay, yeah, they absorb the other broods, and they also absorb Terrans if possible. And so that's where the infestation stuff comes from. What's up, Betsagen? I played Total Annihilation for a very short amount of time, and I didn't have a huge positive experience, but it was when I was much younger. I think generally the issue with Total Annihilation is that it seems to be all about like brainless macro. But again, this is coming from somebody who has not played it much, hasn't watched it much, so I could be completely wrong about this. But I remember an interview with Planetary Annihilation developers who said that they were taking cues from Total Annihilation, and they said that they wanted to remove micro from the game, and they wanted to streamline it and make it so that you were just building giant armies and smashing them into each other. And to me, that's less interesting, because it gives players less opportunity to turn the tide of battles with their skill. It's just, I mean, you turn the tide of battles just by having the bigger army or the more advanced army or whatever, instead of like having the best controlled army. Starcraft is like a really nice combo of micro and macro skill expression possibilities in a way. And yeah, being a commander is really hard, but it's kind of meant to be. That's sort of the main deal there. But again, I have not played a lot of Total Annihilation. I don't know how similar it is to Planetary Annihilation, which is a game that I also didn't play very much of, so I can't speak super heavily on it. You wanted separate broods in the gameplay. Yeah, so that's one of those things where I think you could have him somehow exert control over the other Cerebrits, which would give you a nice roster, a little bit of a rogues gallery of enemy factions or enemy characters, so that you don't have to rely on only one enemy. Although I'm not sure if maybe there's like some other enemy later on. But yeah, I think if you look at the idea behind having multiple Cerebrits or whatever, the reason why that's more attractive is because it gives you more characters to rotate the story around in some capacity, or have some missions related to or whatever. You don't necessarily need to go that route. You could make it so that they were just completely absorbed, and this Cerebrit is like a super Cerebrit that's like not an overmind, but much like has enhanced control capabilities by virtue of consuming those Cerebrits or whatever the fuck. Like you kind of have free reign to mess around with the lore in this case, because again, it's really just justification for some of the other stuff that's already there. Yeah, what's up, Ikeware? Dude, I really fucked up my back, so I've been all out of whack for a couple days now. Sorry, I keep doing it super late. Even this is super late. I wanted to get this started much earlier, but I just couldn't get out of bed. And I saw your DMs too. I'll get back to you in a second. I'm just giving feedback for Veek's campaign planning here. So yeah, I mean, I would just take another look at the Cerebrit stuff later on when you have a bit more grounding for what the rest of the story is going to go in, perhaps, or maybe you already have some ideas from what I've been rambling about. The Terran commanders serving as sub-commanders, subordinates for the Cerebrit as well. It could make sense, but you have to remember that, like, well, basically, I would ask the question: why does it have to be infested Terrans, specifically being built for that purpose? And why isn't it just them repurposing whatever they can? So like maybe he just evolves a specific defiler or queen or overlord or whatever into, maybe there's some new unit. Like again, remember that we're gonna have like crazy in numbers of overlord morphs. So maybe the Alazaleth, which is the max level overlord morph, like maybe there's like a souped up version of the Alazaleth that is acting as that. Like that might even make more sense. Again, not like mandating or anything, but just as an idea. And you could still have the infestation as an aspect, which seems to be the main thrust of the project, considering one of the characters becomes infested. That could still be some aspect of it, and that could be like the Cerebrit, again, consuming everything, right? And I mean, the campaign's even right now called The Devoured Mind. I don't know if that's like the final title or just a working title, but if you wanted to have something like that, like a theme of some sort of all-consuming force that even affects the minds of its victims, that could be the Cerebrit, considering they've already consumed other broods at this point to some capacity or another, regardless of whether or not you engage with my suggestions. Like that's already happened because they've already controlled more than just one brood. So that the idea that that's like the main thrust of it almost seems like not necessarily mindless, but very ad hoc, very like again, a force of nature. Like that, you could really characterize it that way. And this character just ends up being collateral in that respect, but is found to be useful by virtue of their psionic capabilities or whatever, or just by virtue of the experimentation of the Cerebrit that that got them. All right, so our protagonist is named Cormac, and he has a mentor, Wilhelm. They are tasked to eliminate the renegade threat in the sector. They'll first regain control over what is theirs, and then finally push into their main operations base. During that time, they will discover a lingering threat of the Zerg race. So I don't know. It doesn't look like this says anything about the first contact between these guys. Like, I think especially if it's been 200 years, and especially if you're going to say that, like, across multiple sectors, the Overmind had presence, which makes sense. I would suggest that this probably is not the first time that they've made contact, so they shouldn't be like, oh, what's a Zergling? I mean, for one, it's just kind of an eye roll at this point, but for another, I think especially after 200 years after the original campaign, odds are people know what the Zerg are, right? I mean, depending on where when they left from the Confederacy, they may have already made contact with Zerg before they arrived. Especially since it was during the mentioned campaign, during the original campaign, that the Confederates colonized the world. It might even make sense that they would have received some communiques about that. They might know what Zerg and Protoss are, even if they haven't fought them extensively. So you didn't say whether or not in this planning, it doesn't look like anyway, that this was the first time or this is not the first time. It actually kind of implies that they've fought Zerg before because they say a lingering threat. But in that sense, I think it's fine. I just wanted to make that point, generally speaking. During the final push, Cormac is tasked by his command to regain control over a strategic space platform, which is captured by the Zerg. Turned out that the platform was totally converted into a Zerg hive. Cormac is greatly outnumbered, and forces of Wilhelm and his comrades are unable to help because they are taking the final action against the renegades. Okay. Cormac becomes infested. Antagonist Cerebrit introduces him to the Zerg side of the story and tasks him to practice control of his newly created brood on some random Protoss encampment. And afterwards, he is tasked to attack the Terran faction he once served. Cerebrit finally sets his plan of gaining the full control over the sector in motion. All right, so this is throwing up a bunch of confusion flags for me, not necessarily red flags. So the first question I would ask about the space platform is how they wouldn't know that it was converted by a Zerg hive. Like, they didn't want to scanner sweep it or anything? They didn't have any information? Because it feels like it's kind of a contrivance just to get to the point where Cormac can get infested in the first place. Because you've got both of my other forces, you know, his ally or whatever his mentor is like busy attacking some other stuff, right? And they still are interested in splitting their forces to deal with. Now it says a strategic space platform, which is captured by the Zerg. So they don't think it's renegades. They know it's Zerg, but they don't know how much of the Zerg are there. And they, instead of sending like a recon squad or scanner sweep or whatever, they send like this guy and his men. That's the big confusion for me, like right off the bat, is how he got into this situation. Because you kind of want it to feel like there could be no other way for the plot to execute in a certain way. Like, I think a good plot is almost something you don't even realize is happening because you're invested in the character's journey throughout that plot. So you kind of want to take just yourself as the developer. You want to look at the plot as you're writing it out, and you want to say, like, that's basically what this is like a write up of the plot, right? And so you want to write out the plot and then say, what could have happened to make this different? Like, is there something obvious, and even something less than obvious but still worth considering, that would have changed the outcome from what I'm writing into the plot, right? And that's how you avoid stuff like what happened in the default campaigns, where they basically wrote their plot and then made sure that the characters got the player from the first part of the plot to the last part of the plot. You know what I mean? In this case, you would almost certainly benefit from figuring out a way. Like, you don't want to make it super contrived, basically. You don't want to make it like, oh, look at all of these failure points where like they didn't recon it, and then they split their forces despite the fact that prior to that they were fighting together, and now they're, in theory, they might be fighting against a bigger force, but they send like less forces themselves. Like, there's a lot of failure points in the military organization of it all that make sort of sap at the worth of the characterization there. Like, characterizes the military headquarters as kind of dumb, which is not what you want. And I think that analyzing it from this angle of or trying to take as many angles as possible, basically, is probably a good idea. It'll allow you to further understand what you want to do with your plot, but also the counter arguments people could make to your plot. Like, if you can make a counter argument to the actions that people are doing, and you can't resolve that counter argument, that's like a sign that it's time to change some stuff up. You know what I mean? Not necessarily that you have to throw out your idea for the plot, but if it doesn't make sense, then something needs to change about the characterization or the framing. And again, you want to make it feel like there was no other way. It had to happen the way that it happened. And it feels right that it happened that way. Like, this character's character flaw is that he jumps forward into battle, feet first, and maybe doesn't do all of his due diligence. And this is established over a period of time before this core aspect of the story, the twist, if you will, occurs. And in that sense, it's like, okay, you're building on the characterization of the character. He would jump at the opportunity to fight Zerg because he doesn't like Zerg. Who likes Zerg anyway, right? So but he's potentially not going to cross all his T's and dot all his I's. And maybe this is something that his mentor even chastises him about from time to time, like, you really need to watch yourself, you really need to be more careful, like you can't be so careless, especially when people are relying on you, like you're ordering men around now, like you got the responsibility, man. And so like maybe we establish early on that this is some through some method you would have to have your protagonist, express a trait like this. And again, this is just an idea. I'm not saying you need to give him this trait, but that could be one way where maybe he would be issued the order, and part of that order might say wait for Wilhelm, and he doesn't wait. Even that is I'm a little on the fence about that, because that's disrespecting direct orders and putting yourself and the men the men under your control in danger. So I don't know if that makes sense for your character, and it might make him very unsympathetic because like it's kind of a boneheaded move. But there's got to be a way to set up whatever character faults result in him being put in the situation where he becomes infested. And it sounds weird to say it that way, because maybe you initially didn't conceptualize it as, oh, he makes some sort of mistake or he fails in some way, and as a result of that he gets infested. It seems like it's supposed to just be an event that happens. And that would be the other thing, is like it feels very difficult to conceptualize the idea of a campaign where the very first mission you're playing is Terran, and then the second mission you're playing is Terran, but it's supposed to be the end-all, be-all for that section. It's even called the Final Assault, which is like a bait and switch, because it's only the second map, and there's 6 maps. And that is already going to kind of break immersion, because if the name of a mission is lying to you outright, as opposed to being somewhat subversive, like, you could find a less over the top way to say that this is supposed to be some climactic battle or whatever, right? You could find some other verbiage to use there. But if it's more subversive, it's like, oh, you're leading up to it. This campaign is Veek's campaign planning. He just wanted some feedback on it based on what I'm reading here. So yeah, I would say that essentially you want to really take a look at all of the different things that you could poke holes in, right? If you can't poke any holes in it, at that point, maybe you share it to other people who might be able to. Maybe you just go forward. Like if you trust your gut, you think, okay, well, I can't find any way that this doesn't make any sense. So here goes. I'm going to try it. Whatever you decide, as long as you're considering the counter arguments, considering the potential for there to be other options, I think you're on the right track, generally speaking. So I would do that for this particular case. Like you're saying that they should infest the platform from the inside, which wouldn't be detectable per se. Well, the reconnaissance squad would probably be able to detect this up close. So again, that's where you you have a reconnaissance squad. Or, you send out some scouts, but like presumably this guy is actually somewhat important to the war effort, considering he's a military commander. Now, I don't think you would have a military commander on site for even a recon squad. Like the recon squad is kind of meant to recon. There's other things that you could probably poke holes in that respect if you sat down enough. But it seems like you really want to get to the point where he becomes infested and the Cerebrit is giving him orders. In that case, I don't necessarily disagree with the idea that the Cerebrit should be giving him orders or whatever, but you got to remember that like the player needs to buy into the decision making that leads to this result. And if it just feels like there was nothing that could be done, or it's not even like it's no matter what, like this guy was just put into a bad position and nothing he did contributed to this, it kind of feels like a cop-out in a sense. You want to be able to point out the flaws of a character and see how those flaws informed their fate. Now, I guess I didn't really do this too much in my own campaign, but if you look at Inconsummate, it sort of does it the other way around, because like Goska, it's trying to establish that Goska has got some of his humanity left, but there's clearly something that happened before he became infested that was the result of him being infested or led to him being infested, and that's where you can have some sort of concrete example of of that sort of behavior that we're talking about. And now that he's, at the end of the campaign, he's regaining control in some capacity, and he immediately goes to atone for that issue or for his actions or whatever. That tells you something about his character, that he's aware of his faults and he recognizes them as flaws, and that he has some regret or whatever. And like that gives you some information about him. Whereas, again, this is admittedly just a high level, like low resolution, zoomed out approach because I'm just reading the plot. But I don't see that happening here, where like it feels like maybe your protagonist here would feel regret the same way Gaska does or whatever, but to get to the point where he is infested, it doesn't seem like he's very responsible or has much responsibility. And at that point, he's not very interesting, because you need to have your protagonist be able to affect change in the story so that they can have some sort of impact. And if they're just an object that's acted upon by other characters, it feels a bit more like a plot device and less like a character, if that makes sense. Like they might even have character in their dialogue and personality and stuff, in their voice acting and all that. But if they don't affect change in the world, if they don't make decisions that have impact in the setting, then all of the character and thematic and personality is basically window dressing, and the window's closed, right? We don't really get to see what this character's all about. So our protagonist is later on regaining parts of his free will. He has to decide to either sacrifice himself or stop the Zerg onslaught, or to destroy everything he once loved and establish a long-lived service under the Zerg regime. So you're giving the player the choice here. I would really heavily audit this idea. Consider the idea that up until this point, the player's decision-making hasn't made a huge difference in the outcome of maps, it doesn't look like. So this kind of feels like a gimmick out of nowhere. But on top of that, it's really hard. I mean, it's possible, but it's very challenging to write a story and write characters and all that stuff that provide a solid foundation and argumentation for multiple options at the end. Like if the player is making a decision, it looks like between 3 options here, you got to argue for all 3 of them. And maybe part of your, like maybe the way that you ended one of the other missions influences some dialogue you get or some other framing you get, where you might find out some unsavory information about the faction that you were before. But like, I don't see where there would be an argument for... Oh, wait, no, there was only 2 options here. But destroy everything he once loved and establish a long-lived service under the Zerg regime. I don't see an argument for that, right? What's up, Alexander? I don't see how you could... Like, player has to decide, but I don't see how an immersed player would see an argument for the latter. Unless they're personally invested in Zerg, like they just like Zerg more than Terrans or whatever. Renegades have overwhelmed and are now occupying a strategic forward military outpost. They're posing a great threat to the inhabited civilian population. Together with your mentor, you were tasked to reclaim control of that area. Withdrawn military forces will help you regain control over the area. I don't know what withdrawn... You talking about reinforcements? Withdrawn from where? Does it matter where they're withdrawn from? Like, are they just part of our strike force? Oh, I added it earlier, but it's probably destroying you because of all caps or something. There, I just went ahead and disabled all of it. So you shouldn't have that issue anytime. So forces that were evacuated from the outpost, okay. I mean, the premise here is that you're you're rendezvousing with refugees or evacuees from the outpost that was claimed by the renegades. And then you're launching a counteroffensive so that you can take control over it again. I would make sure. I mean, this is not something that I think even is necessary to write up here, but I would come up with a justification for why this area is strategic. Like, what purpose is it going to serve in future battles? Is this going to serve any purpose in the future? Are we going to come back to this area in the future? Does it have something in it, like a side disruptor or an ion cannon or whatever the fuck? Does it have something in it that's worth salvaging? What is the windfall we get? What is the benefit of holding the area? Now you can figure out how you want to present that. I would probably have it be like mentioned briefly, like as establishing context, and then demonstrate the utility of whatever is in whatever the area is. But it's got to be more than just this area is easy to defend or has a lot of resources. Like, there's got to be something there that compels you to, like, gives purpose to the mission. And there also has to be some reason, like, there should be some significance to the region that lasts into the rest of the campaign. Like, maybe you come back here halfway through or something, because you got to figure out whatever is going on here. As Wilhelm, you with your comrades are making the final push against the Terran renegades. Oh, okay. So it's actually the third mission, which is when Cormac is captured. Well, if Cormac is supposed to be the protagonist, I find it odd that we would switch to Wilhelm's perspective. But that's probably fine. It's just that it is going to potentially muddy the waters a little bit, especially since it's right after the first mission. Might send the wrong impression if Cormac is involved in every other mission as the protagonist. Definitely feels out of left field. Hey, get out of here. Okay, so during the final push, Cormac is tasked by his command to regain control over a strategic space platform which was captured by the Zerg. Turned out that the platform is totally converted into a Zerg hive. Okay, you basically... Yeah, this is like a series of... Okay. So... Yeah, I already talked about this pretty heavily. Cormac becomes infested. Antagonist Cerebrit introduces him to the Zerg side of the story. Practice control of his newly created brood on some random Protoss encampment. Well, there's got to be more significance to the Protoss encampment. Your short or your small count of missions means that you got to be very careful with your setup, which is why I was like stressing the idea that the first mission should have, if it's important strategically and regionally or topographically, like you need to sell the player on that, probably by having it appear later on. So the Protoss encampment in this case doesn't look like there's room for you to inject the Protoss into the later missions, or that it would even make sense. Like, this is sort of like Hitler attacking Stalin and Britain at the same time or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, there's not really much of a reason to bring the Protoss into it. It seems like you just wanted to fight Protoss as Zerg, so that there was another inclusion of that race. It doesn't feel like it serves the core story in any capacity, and will, like I said, muddy the waters quite a bit. Even if the Protoss show up later, why did they need to be pulled into the story at all? I would say the Protoss... There should be some setup. Like, maybe these ex-Confederates already know that where Zerg go, Protoss often follow. And they don't want their planets to be glassed. So they put a really big emphasis on, killing the Zerg. So when they discover Zerg in the first mission, that becomes another primary objective, which is why you need to kill the Zerg and the Terrans, the Renegade Terrans. And then, when you're dealing with the space platform, Like, you got to reclaim this space platform because it's a key part of your orbital defense, which you might need against the Protoss. Or there's been detected Protoss signatures have been detected already. We need to get on with this. This is one of the reasons why this mission is so important. Again, like, we don't want our planet being glassed. So we got to fight off the Zerg. We got to reclaim our orbital defenses. We got to start shooting them if they threaten to at least have the ability to defend ourselves. Where currently that is not there. It's like that could be another justification for that. And then the Protoss show up, having been set up before in the story, and so they don't feel like they're coming out of left field. It's not just a random Protoss encampment. It's a Protoss actually showing up for an express purpose. And then the Zerg can do battle with them in some capacity or something. So that's like a big. I think that like having the Protoss show up out of nowhere hurts the story's like feeling of. It doesn't feel very deliberate. You know what I mean? Like it feels like, oh, I want Protoss now, instead of it being organic to the story. That's like a key thing. And so I would like make sure to like a key aspect of storytelling generally, and this goes for characters and how they grow, and as well as plots and how they have twists or how they progress, is you want to make sure that there's a purpose behind everything. And so you don't have to display all of the purposes. You don't have to exposit or show or tell any of these purposes necessarily. You can figure out information control all you want later on. But as a developer, as the writer, if you know what the purpose behind every action, every line of dialogue, every character arc, every mission, every chapter, whatever, if you know the purpose behind every little bit, every component, you'll be able to make more compelling and sensible follow-ups to that. You'll be able to make better decisions as the writer. And that will help you a lot in the future, I think. So just like living by that axiom as far as writing goes, that you need to understand and be able to explain, if asked, the purpose behind everything. And again, to make sure that your purposes are robust, to make sure that your justifications are sensible, you got to poke holes in as many as you want. So it's like a linking of the previous axiom that I mentioned. Oh yeah, I'm not like, I should make it clear, I'm not saying that it's somehow negative or whatever that you weren't able to come out the gate swinging and write a completely sensible, robust first draft or whatever. Like you said, it's a draft you can iterate on. But hopefully this feedback is somewhat helpful for that particular purpose. It's not like a character judgment or value judgment on you, as much as it is me trying to give you as much information that you can use in the future as possible. So Infested Cormac is tasked to attack the Terran faction he once served. You're tasked to fight with his broods on the front. You have to fight your mentor on the battlefield. As your free will is near to non-existent at this point, you cold-heartedly kill him. Yeah, this is the problem with the binary, basically, especially as Alexander pointed out that at the end, he does a 180 essentially. I tried to make it clear that while Goska didn't have the ability to do what he wanted to do, so he didn't have free will, he had some agency with how to get the job done, and that was he used that agency to facilitate different little cheats, like the raiders having no casualties despite the fact that their starports have been being detonated, right? Now, it seems like a really weird thing when you write it out that way. Like, I think it's odd that it's been X number of starports have already been detonated off screen, and he goes to detonate another one in the intro, and they don't, evacuate all the way. Like, the premise isn't very robust. But the idea behind it is he's got agency. He's trying to execute that agency. He's very clearly maintaining his humanity in some capacity, even though he can't express it through his actions. Now, that's my own take on infestation. Obviously, you can have your own. But I think that it's much less interesting, generally speaking, than many other options, including what I was just talking about, to have a character that simply 180s as the plot demands it, seemingly. You got a loose justification based on the power of not really love as much as it is like connection or whatever. But it reads like a little bit eye rolly because you're essentially having like saying that some sort of emotional connection or trauma can break the mental conditioning of the Zerg, which seems to me like you'd be very you'd have a tough job to try to explain how that works. And that's just more like poking holes, basically. So I would find a different and more engaging way to have this resolution. I do think it's fine for the mentor character to die, even sometimes at the hands of the mentee, the character that they are the mentor of. I think it's like the mentor character oftentimes, just as a trope, is used, like their death is used to impart some final lesson to the character, the protagonist or whatever. The problem here is like the sage or mentor character. I mean, I don't know what lessons he's really imparting yet. It's not really in the plot, of course. So I can't tell how impactful his death would even be. I don't know. Yeah, that is tough. So I would need more concrete information about what is established and all that stuff. And I think you'd benefit just from writing it out, even if I didn't, like, even if you didn't share it with me per se. You writing all that stuff out would probably be useful. And I already talked about the player has to decide things. So yeah, hopefully that was useful conversation or whatever. And I wanted to experiment with the extenders. I should take a look to see if we can add more Pi Ice entries somehow. Well, the only way you can improve is by trying. So don't get too demotivated because you're not batting 100 right at the gate, like I said. I am a little okay, so maybe I can just add entries to the settings dialog. Shit, homie. Might have to restart it. No, unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's adding. Maybe I have to edit in some other entry. Well, I'm looking for a way to add new entries to iScript so that I can add stuff like the Paladin and new missiles and whatnot without having to replace existing entries. Adding it to iScript ID list.txt did not do the trick. So I'm not sure if there's some extra step, if there's some hard code in PyIce to only display the first 412 entries from 0 to 411. If you wouldn't mind taking a look at that and let me know what you find, I would be much obliged. In the meantime, I am going to take a quick bathroom break, so see you in a bit. Yo, yo, yo! You kind of like when a character does a 180? Characters doing 180s. It's like the same thing as when you got a gimmick, okay? Gimmick story, gimmick characters. Why is mer person an emote? What the fuck is wrong with everybody? Yeah, true. You can't. You can even listen. You can have gimmicks all over the place. I just wouldn't recommend it. That's all. I think it's fine to do stories about factions instead of characters, Iquare. It just means that you've got to change how your dialogue works. It's definitely better than it was. My back, that is. Why is UD Commander always on a phone? Oh, allegiances. Yeah, it's a little different. All right. Kind of confused about this flingy thing here. Index ID. I assume that must be unit ID. What's up, Kaji? How you doing, dude? Modding yourself, but not Starcraft. I misinterpreted that at first to mean that you were literally modding yourself. Like, you were what was being modded. Just tapping into my genome here. Changing my eye color. Yeah, no kidding. Sign me up, dude. We have the technology. We can rebuild him. Oh yeah, you wanted a list of the quotes, right? Or I'll send that to you. I can't really do much as far as adding new iScript entries yet, but hopefully that's something to figure out in the future. And what do you mean by extended? I mean, the unit is listed, right? And its unit ID is listed, and its flingy ID is listed. Oh, this is supposed to be flingy ID. What a prankster I am. A prankster to myself. So you mean I should just, like, leave a note somewhere next to them? Like, next to flingy ID, I can do that. Shit, dude, Luciferius is starting his modding career. Or restarting his career, I guess. He'll be contributing to the campaign crap we've got coming up. Quite exciting. So how's your Tip Sun modding going anyway? Um, Oh, cool. A new skill to learn. Bonk. Hey, if you can like make a new set of tech trees or whatever and then jump into an existing map and test them, that could be pretty useful. So I would go for it, man. I think I've used most of the new unit IDs, but I haven't implemented a lot of them. Like a lot of them are just there because I'm going to use them for extenders, you know? Now I know I also set up the quarry, so I should probably do that. $213. Okay. So we've plugged in the Irileth, Pennant, Savant, Madrigal, Paladin, Quarry. I don't actually have a graphic for the Savant, so I'll probably have to throw in a copy of the Ghost as a placeholder. Well, the biggest issue anyway is that, again, iScript entries. I guess we'll also need to set up the salvo yard. So that we can actually build the new units. Oh yeah, let me jump down to the pennant mark. Though I don't even have a graphic for the salvo yard just yet. Cool. Okay. Got my updated files there. So yeah, it looks like for now... Okay, looks like I already got all this stuff in here. Am I missing? Oh yeah, I'm missing Salvo Yard. I guess we'll just copy this here. Because again, I don't have anything for that right now. Big issue is we don't have the ability to place these new units. So, I mean, I guess we do. As long as they're existing unit IDs, they're just not going to look proper in the editor. Oh, it probably doesn't have Zerg stuff. Now it's just not starting at all. Oh, maybe it doesn't have the latest plugins for this. I didn't do anything in ModRS though. Yeah, I don't know why that would have anything to do with entire thing not starting at all, but hopefully I can figure it out. I was kind of hoping to be able to deploy some more new units, but... You know how it is. Taking a long ass time to build here, boy. Oh wait, what's this? All right, I shall return in a few minutes. BRB. All right. Looks like we managed to finally compile our stuff while I was gone. Oh, it's because I didn't have I didn't put in the query, I think. But there's no debug message for it, so I was thoroughly perplexed. Oh wait, that's the salvo yard. Fuck. Well, at least we have all of the updates anyway. There we go. Why? It's okay. This was not unforeseen. $2.14. $153. Destroyed. Wonder why that's happening. See if we can shed some light on this. Apparently not. Create splash weapon proc. Huh? Why would it be creating a weapon proc at the beginning of the game? Like, I could see that happening if movement type was 1, starts at 1 instead of 0. But I don't think that happens. Okay, let's start removing units. Oops. So first we'll remove all extended units that have entries for them. I don't even have the salvo yard placed. This is the quarry, though. I don't think I placed savants. That should be all of them. Yeah, I would. Well, I guess maybe that was the savant. No, I don't think so. That was the paladin, I'm pretty sure. Savant would be right after it, though. I don't have madrigals placed either, so I deleted the Irelith. Mutation pit. So let's try running it now and see if we still get crashes. Okay. So the regular game seems to work fine. So now we'll say... we'll re-add just the pennant, I guess. Well, that's pretty funny, but definitely not what we wanted. Why the fuck does the pennant have that in its flingy? So the sprite ID is 519. Then we go to sprites. And its image ID is 1002. Then we go to image ID 1002. It almost makes me think I configured it with the wrong data rewrite, maybe? Looking at this now. So because we have 518, which is quarry, and then 519, which is pennant. That's in sprites. Now it's quarry, pennant, Irelith in here as well, with pennant having 212. But that's what I put in here. I put in the pennant unit ID and 212 as the flingy. And the flingy corresponds to the proper image entry, which is 519. Now there's one way that this could be going wrong, which could be that in sprites the max entry is like a different entry than I thought. Now, it looks like it goes from 0 to 516, so 517 should be a valid starting entry. And then images should be the same deal. Ends at 998. Oh, okay. So I missed an image entry, it looks like. So we should say image 1000, and this can be copy of marine. So we got 245, 78, 1111, 0000, 2. Okay, so let's try with this. That could definitely explain some errors. And now let's check out the pennant and see if it's any different. Okay, yeah, seems to be correct. All right, so now let's... just try everything. Oh, this time we get a plugin crash. All right, so let's... delete just the mutation pit, and then I'll delete the, some more stuff afterwards. Same crash. crash. Deleted the quarry. Okay. And now we've got the paladins deleted. Okay, so that seems to be correct. Or in theory, it's fine. So what if we just delete the paladin then? Oh, check out my quarry, dude. I don't know why it's off kilter, but... Oh yeah, and it also still overlays the comm set, which is pretty funny. Now that's an epic kit bash if I ever saw one. Iroleth appears fine. Mutation Pit doesn't appear to actually load the right graphic, which is weird. Yeah, even on completion. Okay. So now I gotta figure out why the Paladin specifically is crashing then. Time to look at its configuration here. So the Paladin is here as 186, 215. So we scroll down to, once again, making sure we have 209, 210, 211, 212, 213, 214, 215. Yeah, here's Paladin. Sprite ID is 522, so we'll keep that in mind. And it uses iScript. Its movement type is 2, which means that it should be fine. iScript control. Again, 522. Quarry Pennant, Iroleth. Yeah. 522 is the Paladin. Points to image entry 1005. Start is visible 1. Include envision 1. Selection circle 2. Don't see any issues here. Okay, so here's 1005 Paladin, GRP ID 934. Well, we know the quarry works, and that's GRP ID 930, so this is the same thing. And 934 is indeed the GRP file for the Paladin. It's like the ID file or whatever. Ah, but its iScript is set to 411. That might be the problem. Right, so the iScript is potentially the issue. So if we were to find a free iScript, we could make an iScript real quick and then see where we go from there. So I am going to pop open PyIce. And we are going to try to find an entry here in the doodad listing. So we'll say ISID 404. Yeah, that exists. 3 exists. 2 exists. 1 exists. A 400 doesn't exist, but it's a desert doodad. So in theory, it would be actually used. It sure does. 364 and 365. So neither of those are apparently in use. Or, sorry, 363. Doesn't even seem like it points to a graphic. Don't they normally say, like, oh, this points to a graphic? Yeah. So it's not actually... It might actually be completely unused stuff right here. So we'll say 364. We'll go ahead and try that one, I guess. ISID for Paladin, rather. Okay. Now let's grab the Marine. I feel like this must be a doodad thing or something. So I probably shouldn't replace this. The other question here is there even a GRP that I can cannibalize for the shadow? Oh, Veek, did you figure out if it was possible for iScript or PyIce to reference extended GRPs? Like, I've got, for example, a bunch of image entries in here that are put in through images TBL. If I add one, it becomes GRP ID, whatever the string ID is. Okay, that's awesome. So I'll try that right now with this. Paladin Shad. And that'll be GRP ID 938. I mean, it's not too many because we're already in the 900s. But yeah, that's awesome. All right, for this, I think I can copy it from the Goliath death. Let me open up the graphic. Not even sure what sound entries I can still use. I think there are some. TDN PSS 08. I think there are 8. Let me see. Yeah, there are. So we got walking, walking to idle, and all the attacks. This should work. Okay, so now I just need to pop into images.ext here and modify this iScript entry, which again was like 364 or 363. Apparently it didn't get saved. Did I save over the... Oh, okay. Apparently somehow I managed to save over the marine entry. I don't even know how that's fucking possible. Okay. Oh, probably because of the ISID or whatever. Alright, so 360... We'll do 364. Okay. And then in this, I can write 364. And make sure that under paladin, yeah. So let's add that. Why does this always happen? Okay. Oh, nice shadow, dude. Oh, well, oh yeah, I didn't add the latest ARR file here. I am impressed about that one. Well, it's still fucked up. Unfortunately, it also appears to be quite tiny. Like, it's actually smaller than the regular Goliath. I do feel like the frames are getting chopped up, so maybe I should remove 364. Oh, I can't actually use extended entries. It keeps auto-correcting it to 938, which is the last GRP entry, I guess. Is that even true? The last GRP entry is 929? According to this. I mean, it lists 938, but it's rendering it as the Xel'Naga Temple, which is 884, so I don't know how that's fucking possible. Very strange stuff. Yeah, I'll try removing the 00 thing. I think that might be fucking it. And I guess instead of just a weight 6, we should have like 10 or something. Just to make sure I actually have Paladin Shad. Yeah, Paladin -Shad.grp. Well, it's still pretty cool that we have an extended unit, even if it's rough around the edges for now. Two zero zero. Huh. I am thoroughly perplexed about what the next step would be, but I think we'll go ahead and close stuff out here for now. We made some pretty good progress figuring out what's up with the extenders. And I'm looking forward to getting them fully operational so I can start adding more units to the Hydra game state, which I hope will be very enjoyable for all. But yeah, we'll keep you guys apprised of developments. There will be a fraud night in about an hour. So whoever's here will be able to hang out and play some games with a working version. We're just going to use what's on GitHub instead of me fucking around with stuff. So, thanks for hanging out, guys. Appreciate you guys also bearing with me with these shorter than usual mod streams where I don't get as much work done as I could be. I was already kind of doing that anyway due to some time constraints, but on top of it all with this fucking back injury, it's not helping. So I'm going to go ahead and do some stretching to make sure I'm limber and ready to go for Fraud Night. And I'll see you guys then. Take care.